Alright folks, so this is the brand new Suunto race, and this builds upon the foundation that was just set with their recent Suunto vertical, having many of the same features like a dual frequency satellite chipset, offline topo maps, as well as a touchscreen protected with a sapphire lens. But instead of the memory and pixel display that's found in the vertical, they went with an AMOLED display. But they also added a new crown dial, which helps usability quite a bit, and there's also now HRV tracking. But here's maybe the most interesting thing about the race: the price. So the Suunto vertical was the start of kind of a new era for Suunto, being a substantially new watch than what they've had before, and now they have an AMOLED counterpart being the race. So just like the vertical, the race comes in two different versions. There's a stainless steel model as well as a titanium model, and that's the one I have for you here today. And when it comes to price, the stainless steel race comes in at $449, and the titanium model comes in at $549, which is substantially lower than the vertical and offers many of the same features. And it's also a pretty competitive price in the current landscape of sports watches. Oh, and today's Suunto is also announcing their new Suunto Wing headphones, so they're kind of branching out, and I'll have another video later on down the road on these. So in this video, we're going to go over everything new with the new Suunto race, and this video is more about going over all the new features and what it has to offer, and in about a week or two I'll have my full in-depth review. So I've definitely already been putting it through the paces, but there's actually some features that take some time to test fully, like the new heart rate variability feature. So while I will be going over tons of detail in this video, I really wouldn't call this an in-depth review, at least by my standards. And one more thing I wanted to mention before we get started is that you may see some banding in some of the footage in this video, and this is just what happens sometimes when filming AMOLED displays, where the frame rate on the camera doesn't quite match up to the refresh rate on the watch, but you can't see that with the naked eye. Alright, so let's get into this new Suunto race, and like I was mentioning earlier, this is the titanium charcoal version of the race, and as you can see, it shares a very similar design to the vertical. It's basically the same size at 49mm and just ever so slightly thinner. And in terms of weight, same deal there, where it's about the same but just ever so slightly lighter. And then when it comes to durability, this should be similar to the vertical as well, where both the stainless steel model as well as the titanium model should hold up well. And they also have a 100-meter water resistance rating, and then all of them do also have a sapphire lens. They did actually change the top edge of the bezel a bit though on the race, where it's a little bit more rounded, where the vertical has a bit more squared off edge. And then on the back of the device, this is basically identical to the vertical, where it uses the same heart rate sensor, it uses the same magnetic charging interface, and it still uses 22mm industry standard bands. However, they did change the band just slightly, and I'm actually kind of a big fan of this change. So the band on the vertical has these little ridges, and what happens here is that when you're either taking the watch off or putting it back on, these ridges would kind of catch ever so slightly on the opposite buckle. And it's a super minor thing, I know, but I tend to just prefer the band of the race a little bit better. But moving on to the bigger differences though, the first is the AMOLED display, and this is a 1.43-inch AMOLED screen with a resolution of 466 by 466 pixels. And just like other AMOLED displays, it's a super bright, vibrant display where colors just pop, and it's definitely bright enough to see outdoors in direct sunlight. And the AMOLED display also does have an optional always-on display mode where it dims when you're not interacting with it, and this is both for just use as a watch as well as during workouts. And then to wake it back up, all you have to do is either turn your wrist or press one of the buttons. And then it also has a sleep mode. So what happens here is that it stays in the dimmed state unless you press a button. So turning your wrist won't actually wake up the display in this mode, which is good for sleep. However, what I noticed is that unlike other watches that have AMOLED displays with sleep modes, the sleep mode doesn't seem to completely turn the display off. It still stays in a dim state all throughout the night. And then I also noticed that it doesn't have a palm feature that some other watches have, where if you place your palm over the display when it's enabled, it switches to the dim state. But those are things that probably could be changed via software update, so that would be cool to see, or not see if you know what I'm saying. Now, one concern when it comes to AMOLED displays is screen burn-in. So what can happen here is that if an AMOLED display is constantly lighting up specific LEDs, there can be burn-in, but it looks like they actually thought of that, where it does appear that they do some sort of pixel shifting with the always-on display mode to prevent that from happening. The Suunto race also has a touchscreen, and swipes and touches are very predictable, and it works similarly to the vertical for the most part, where you can swipe up and down to access different areas of the interface, you can swipe right to go back, and you can also tap on many items in the menus. However, this brings us to the new crown dial on the race, and this improves usability quite a bit. So having just 3 buttons can be a little bit tough when it comes to usability, and having a crown dial to scroll through menus frees up the upper and lower buttons to perform other functions. So they've actually reworked the interface on the race to take advantage of that. So with the vertical, if you swipe to the left or to the right from the watch face, or if you press the middle button, it would cycle through all the widgets, just like so. And then back from the watch face, if you press the down button, that goes to more of the apps like the map, the compass, the logbook, and so on. And then what you can do here is either swipe to the right or long press the middle button to go back. And then to access sport profiles, you would use the upper button, and then you would scroll through the list with the same button, and then go down the list with the down button. And then you could long press the middle button to access settings and then use the touchscreen or up and down buttons to scroll through menu items. But with the race, to access widgets, you'll instead swipe up, or you can use the digital crown. And you'll also notice that this is kind of a new widget list with these new glanceable widgets. So the first one is a control panel where you can see battery life. And if we tap on here, it goes into that menu where we can perform other functions. And then there's going to be your logbook of workouts. Next up is a timer, then notifications, heart rate, blood oxygen, energy resources, and so on. And there's also some new ones down here that we'll talk about here in just 1 second that are centered around training and recovery. But back to the watch face, swiping left or right is a little bit different now, where if we swipe to the left, this is a pinned widget, but it doesn't actually scroll through all your widgets anymore like the vertical. And then you can pin a specific widget just by double tapping on the screen. However, if we swipe to the right, this will go back to the watch face, but if we swipe again, it doesn't do anything currently. Now, if we swipe down from the watch face, this is the same as the vertical where it shows the sport profile list, and you can also access this by using the crown by scrolling. On the vertical, you would either need to swipe down or use the upper button. So since the crown dial actually performs up and down scrolling, the upper and lower buttons aren't really up and down buttons anymore. So from the watch face, the lower button now brings up the controls menu, where on the vertical, that brought up kind of the apps. And then same thing goes for the upper button, where on the vertical, that brought up the sport profile list, but now that actually brings up the last sport profile that you used. But probably one of the best things of having that new crown dial is that the lower button is now utilized as a back button, which, to be perfectly honest with you, was always one of the toughest parts of the interface with the vertical for me, where I either had to swipe right or long press the middle button. You can still do that with the race, but it now has that dedicated back button, which I think is awesome. Oh, and then in addition, you can also use that crown dial on the map page to zoom in and out. So adding that digital crown is really a big step forward when it comes to usability. Oh, and then sorry, one more thing with the interface is that you also do have the ability to now assign a long press shortcut to the upper or lower button. So I currently have the upper button set to the flashlight and the lower button to access media controls. The user interface on the race is also faster than the vertical, where the vertical does have some noticeable lag to it. They're using the same processor as the vertical, but they've actually added more memory, resulting in an interface that certainly is faster. However, you still may notice a little bit of lag depending on where you are in the interface, but still, it's a big improvement. When it comes to battery life, that can be a concern with watches with AMOLED displays, but they were able to get some quite decent battery life out of it, where the race ranges anywhere from like 6 days all the way up to 12 days. And that's going to be basically if you use the always on display or not, but that is with full 24/7 heart rate recording. And then when it comes to battery life for recording outdoor activities, in the highest performance mode using dual frequency, that's up to 40 hours, and that's quite good. Now, day-to-day battery life will still depend on how you use it, as well as how many outdoor activities that you track. And from my testing so far, it's on track to get that 6-day estimate with the always on display mode enabled. And that's even while recording some longer outdoor activities and even enabling sleep tracking as well as SpO2 tracking for sleep. And I'll definitely have more details for you in my final in-depth review. And then the race also does have a fast charging feature where if your watch is dead, you can place it on the charger for just 10 minutes, which will get you enough battery life for 6 hours of training. And then if you want to charge it for an hour, that'll get you up to 75-ish%, and then a full charge will take about 2 hours. The race also comes with a dual frequency satellite chipset, just like the vertical. And with this sort of technology, it's designed to deliver higher accuracy, especially in environments where satellite signals can kind of get iffy, like around really tall buildings, tall canyon walls, as well as heavy tree cover. And I haven't been able to test it in all the environments that I'd like to test it in to give it a stamp of approval, but it is looking good so far, and that's both for the total distance collected as well as the actual tracks themselves. However, what I can tell you right now is that with the vertical, it produces some of the crispiest tracks that I've seen. It's seriously super impressive, so I'll have a lot more detail for you if it actually stacks up in my final review. The Suunto race also comes with offline topo maps, just like the vertical, and these are map images where it adds context to your location with images of streets, bodies of water, as well as trails. Now, these aren't like the fully routable maps like you'd find on a Garmin, so these are going to be more similar to a Chorus device, but these do still help a ton versus something like breadcrumb-style navigation. And when it comes to downloading the map, you can do this over Wi-Fi, and all the maps are free, by the way. And when it comes to navigation using routes, you will be able to download routes to the watch itself for navigation in conjunction with the maps, and it also does have turn-by-turn navigation with Komoot. And then on the training and recovery side of things, the race also comes with some additional data that you can view on the watch itself, like a recovery training widget, a training progress widget, as well as TSS, in addition to the energy resources widget that was previously found on the vertical. So with the recovery training widget, this indicates how ready you are at the moment to race or basically have your best performance. And this is based on your training stress balance. So like here, it shows a score of -20, which indicates that at the moment, I've probably had enough training and I haven't quite recovered enough to train again. And basically, if I have a positive number here, that starts to indicate that I'm ready for productive training. And then we have this progress widget, and this shows your chronic training load, which is a way of looking at longer term training trends based on an average of your daily training load over the last 6 weeks or so. So like here, it says that my training load is in the moderate range and it's also productive. But with this sort of metric, it can basically allow you to ramp up training smarter by making sure that you don't increase your training load too much in a given period. And then there's also a TSS widget, which is your training stress score. So this shows your training load for the current week. And then it also shows how recovery and gains are impacting your TSS along with your 6-week TSS average. And then finally, it also shows a summary of your CTL, so your chronic training load, your ATL, which is your acute training load, which is your training load over the last 7 days, and then your TSB, or the training stress balance that we saw earlier with the recovery widget. And then the race also comes with the ability to track HRV, or heart rate variability during sleep. And HRV has become a super valuable tool, not just for serious athletes, but really anyone who's interested in general health and well-being, by giving you an indication of how different factors like workouts, sleep, and recovery play a role in how ready you are for training or a workout. Now, the HRV feature actually takes 2 weeks to get a baseline measurement, so that's why we see here that there's actually no data for this recovery widget. So this is something that I'm going to have to kind of follow up in my in-depth review on. And speaking of heart rate, the new race uses the same heart rate sensor that they include on the vertical. And what I've experienced with the vertical, at least, is that it's really okay for steady state workouts where there's not much arm movement or wrist flexion, but for anything else, I'd probably use a heart rate strap. And so far, that's about the same for the race that I'm seeing. However, the race, just like the vertical, does pair to Bluetooth external heart rate straps. So that's something I just go and highly recommend if you want the most meaningful training feedback. And then for a couple other miscellaneous things that they have now, so there's now a Find My Phone feature where you can ping your phone as long as it's in Bluetooth range. You can now also set multiple alarms. And there's also a morning report style feature where it gives you details on your sleep and your energy levels first thing in the morning, which is also available on the vertical. And then there's also updates in the app surrounding training, but those bits actually don't seem to appear yet enabled for me. Oh, and for all you vertical owners out there, you will be getting some of the new software features with an update. I'm not sure of the exact list of features that will be making it over, but I do know for a fact that the HR feature will be added to the vertical. And in regards to timing, they haven't mentioned an exact time frame quite yet, but I'll make sure to have an update on like Threads or Twitter or Instagram or something like that. So the race, this is a pretty big move for Suunto, not only for adding the AMOLED display, but also the crown, which helps usability quite a bit. And then all those new training features are also nice to see, along with HRV. But really, I think the bigger story here is the price point. It's very competitive and it does offer a lot of features for the money. But there are a few things to consider with this watch though, so the interface may not be as snappy as some other watches with AMOLED touchscreen displays, and there aren't some smartwatch features like contactless payments or offline music storage and playback, but they do have music controls for the music playing on your phone. Now, being that it does cost considerably less than the vertical, why would you want the vertical? Well, it mainly comes down to two things: battery life as well as the kind of display, where you may prefer a memory pixel display versus AMOLED. But that display technology also translates into battery life, and with the vertical, it's ridiculously good. I mean, the race is very good for an AMOLED display, but this is kind of crazy. And as I've been using the vertical over the last few weeks to wrap up my long-term review, the battery just keeps on going and going, and then if you have enough solar charging, it goes even farther. And something else to consider, I suppose, is that the vertical is made in Finland with 100% renewable energy. But in terms of build quality and construction, I can't tell the difference between the race and the vertical. Both are built very well. Anyhow, that's everything new with the new Suunto race, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts as well, like do you prefer AMOLED versus the memory and pixel, thoughts on the crown dial, and of course the price. Definitely let us all know down in the comment section down below what you think, and if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for my in-depth review of the race that's coming up soon, as well as my long-term review of the vertical. In the meantime, have fun out there, and we will see you in the next video.